going to speak about quiet people without flattering them and without rescuing them. Not because they are broken and not because they are special, but because silence is often the visible edge of something older, heavier, and far more deliberate than personality. Quiet people often see what others miss, not because they are insightful by nature, but because their nervous systems were trained to notice. This training didn't come from curiosity, it came from pressure. Many of them learned early that the room mattered more than they did. When you grow up in an environment where safety is inconsistent, attention becomes a survival skill. Not the soft kind of attention associated with mindfulness or presence, but the hard kind, the kind that scans, predicts, and prepares. A child in that environment does not have the luxury of being noisy, spontaneous, or absorbed in themselves. They learn instead to read tone shifts, micro-expressions, pauses that last a fraction too long. They notice who is about to explode, who is withdrawing, who needs calming, who cannot be relied on today. That child is often quiet because noise draws attention, and attention can be dangerous. In families shaped by chaos, neglect, emotional volatility, or role confusion, children frequently become something other than children. Boshamin Yanagi described this as parentification, but the word can sound too neat for what actually happens. It isn't just that the child takes on tasks, it's that the child takes on responsibility for emotional stability they did not create and cannot control. They become regulators in systems that refuse to regulate themselves. A parentified child learns that their own needs are negotiable, but other people's needs are urgent. They learn that relief comes not from being cared for, but from preventing collapse. Silence becomes useful. Listening becomes necessary. Observation becomes the price of staying out of the line of fire. This isn't a personality preference. It's a calibration. Attachment theory names what happens when the people meant to provide safety are inconsistent, unavailable, or frightening. Bowlby talked about proximity and protection, but for many children, proximity increased threat instead of reducing it. Ainsworth showed us that when care is unpredictable, children adapted not by demanding more, but by minimizing themselves. They learn that expressing need doesn't bring comfort. It brings irritation, dismissal, or nothing at all. So the system adapts. The child stops signaling. They stop asking. They stop showing. Quiet people often learn that being unseen was safer than being known. Chronic childhood stress doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There may be no single event to point to, but the body doesn't require spectacle to register a threat. McEwen's work on allostatic load explains how repeated low-grade stress reshapes the stress response system over time. The child's nervous system stays slightly elevated, slightly braced, slightly ahead of the moment. This is where vigilance becomes baseline. A vigilant nervous system does not relax easily. It does not fully trust calm. It assumes that peace is temporary and that something will be required soon. That system becomes very good at detecting patterns, inconsistencies, and unspoken tensions. It notices when words and behavior don't align. It notices when someone is lying to themselves. It notices the emotional weather before it breaks. Quiet people often see what others miss because they are not inside the moment. They are monitoring it. Trauma research describes hypervigilance as a symptom, but that framing misses something important. Hypervigilance was not a malfunction. It was a solution. Van der Kolk and others have shown how the traumatized brain prioritizes detection over reflection. Safety first, meaning later if at all. For a child, this vigilance kept things from getting worse. It allowed anticipation. It reduced surprise. It offered the illusion of control where none existed. But it also came with a cost. When a child learns to suppress emotional expression to maintain stability, they are not learning regulation. They are learning containment. Gross's research on emotional suppression shows that it reduces outward expression but increases internal strain. The feeling doesn't disappear. It gets stored. The body holds it. Quiet people often aren't calm. They are compressed. Their emotional development is frequently uneven. Some capacities mature: early empathy, perspective-taking, responsibility. Others stall: playfulness, dependency, rest. This split development creates adults who are competent far beyond their years in some domains and strangely underdeveloped in others. They can manage crises, but struggle with ease. They can hold space for others, but feel intrusive, needing space themselves. This isn't irony. It's structure. Shame sits underneath much of this. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet belief that needing care is a burden. Lewis and Shore wrote about shame as a relational emotion form, not in isolation, but in moments where the child's needs are met with withdrawal, disapproval, or overwhelm. Over time, the child learns that having needs threatens connection, so they stop having them, or they hide them so well they forget what they are. Quiet people often carry an unspoken rule. If I need something, I must earn it. Rest must be justified. Support must be deserved. Care must be reciprocal to the point of self-erasure. They may appear independent, but that independence is frequently enforced, not chosen. Hyperindependence is not confidence. It is an avoidance of disappointment. In adulthood, these adaptations don't disappear just because the environment improves. The nervous system does not update itself automatically. The vigilance remains, even when the danger is gone. The body continues to prepare for a threat that no longer exists, because at one point, not preparing was costly. This is why quiet people often struggle with rest. When nothing is demanded of them, their system doesn't settle its scans. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Silence feels exposed. They may feel guilty when they stop moving, stop producing, stop helping. Productivity becomes a way to stay ahead of the imagined moment when they will be needed or blamed. They are often deeply empathetic, but guarded. They understand others well, but reveal little. Not because they lack depth, but because depth once made them vulnerable. Their empathy developed as a tool, not a gift. It allowed them to track other states, so they could adjust their behavior accordingly. This creates a strange loneliness. People feel understood by them, but they rarely feel understood in return. Quiet people often carry a constant internal watchfulness. Even in safe relationships, part of them is waiting. Waiting for a shift in tone. Waiting for withdrawal. Waiting for the moment when they will need to adapt again. This is not pessimism. It is conditioning. And it is exhausting. None of this means that quiet people are damaged. It means they were shaped by environments that required them to grow in specific directions at specific times. These adaptations were functional. They reduced harm. They allowed survival. But survival is not the same as living. The hidden cost of these adaptations is that the system never learned that safety could be sustained without effort, that care could be given without repayment, that rest could exist without consequence. The nervous system remains loyal to an old map, even when the terrain is changed. There is often grief buried under the quiet. Not always conscious grief, but a sense of something missed. A softness that never had space to form. A version of self that didn't get to be careless, loud, or held. This grief doesn't announce itself. It shows up as fatigue, irritability, numbness, or a vague sense of being behind in a life that looks fine from the outside. Quiet people are often praised for their resilience. This praise can feel hollow. Resilience implies triumph. What it often ignores is the price paid to acquire it. There is nothing noble about a child who had to become small, responsible, or emotionally invisible to keep things together. There is nothing romantic about vigilance that never turns off. These were not strengths developed in freedom. They were strategies formed under constraint, and they do not simply dissolve with insight. The unsettling truth is that many quiet people do not know how to rest without permission, because permission was never given. Their bodies learned that safety was conditional, that care was fragile, that silence was protective. Healing, when it happens, does not feel like becoming weaker. It feels disorienting. It feels like standing down from a post that was never supposed to be permanent. It feels like letting go of a role that once kept everything from falling apart. For many, learning that rest, care, and safety no longer require permission is not comforting. It is destabilizing. Because when the vigilance softens, what comes into view is not ease, but the full weight of what was carried alone. And that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen.